All right, welcome everybody. Got a lot of you on the call. Hopefully nobody got locked out today. I think today is March 13th, and the topic is, of course, getting to the real decision maker. Really excited about putting this thing together. Glad it came together like it did. I'm pretty amazed at the turnout, so that's very cool. I will have my chat window open. Can't guarantee I'll answer stuff, but if you got questions, feel free to pop them up there. Or if you can't hear or if something's going wonky, let me know. So today, a couple things we're going to talk about, right? We're talking about the decision process, right? I mean, obviously the topic was getting to the decision maker, but really this is a bigger conversation about the entire decision process. We're talking about active opportunities, right? So one of the questions, or several of the questions that I got when I asked you guys to put questions in, had to do with how do I get to the decision maker, from a prospecting standpoint? How do I get a hold of them? How do I get their attention initially? I've got another webinar called Working Through the Executive Assistant, which is all about getting to the, decision maker, getting to executives early on, and how do you do that? So hit me up with an email, or I'll just include it in the probably include it in the reply, or whatever you call it, the post, post masterclass thingy here, and it'll have the link in there. I just said that. That's another masterclass. I had a bit of a conundrum, and that was I've got so much content on this, right? Getting to the decision maker, the topic of decision process is incredibly important, but it's a massive, massive topic, right? We're not going to cover anything near where we need to in an hour here. There's a good chance I'm going to go long. So if you need to drop off, I won't be offended. Like I said, I'm going to send the recording out to everybody, but I could go, I don't know, maybe an extra hour. We'll see how it goes. But I've got a bunch of content, and then I've organized the presentation so that the questions, you guys had submitted some questions, and there were some really good questions are at the end there. And we can go through those and probably take a bunch of time. And then I'm sure you guys will have more questions. You can hit me up via chat. We'll try to get to. So what are we trying to walk away with today? I thought a lot about what are the really critical learning objectives. What are the things that I want to make sure people get versus just a lot of stuff? So I think it's absolutely important to understand if you're talking to the real decision maker. One of the biggest problems people have is thinking you're talking to someone who can make a decision and then finding out later you cannot, right? The reality is somebody says I'm the decision maker, and then a month later, 2 months later, 6 months later, when it comes time to make a decision, I just have to ask one more person. Well, maybe they weren't the real decision maker, right? So that's a challenge. How do you get to this person? Even if you know who they are, how do you get to them? It could be a matter of getting their attention. It could be a matter of getting around your current contact, right? And then there's all the requisite head trash that goes on with that. That's all the stuff that relates to, are they going to get mad at me? Are they going to block me? Are they going to be pissed off? And maybe I'm just nervous about it. Maybe I'm just uncomfortable with I don't know, conflict. Fundamentally, the real challenge is how do you keep them engaged throughout the process, right? I'm gonna show you a little map of what decision makers care about, where in the sales process they tend to hang out, and hopefully that gives you a little guidance about what the things that are on their mind. But the bottom line is they're involved at the beginning. They have to be. If they're not, there may not actually be. Says some of my text on my slides is cut off. Well, I'm looking at it on my iPad. It's showing up, so it may be a sizing on your end, Allison. How do you keep them involved? They really care in the beginning. They care a bunch at the end, right? But we need to talk about that today. So, who cares? Who gives a crap, right? Who really? Why does it even matter if I get to the decision maker or not? Well, think about how much time is wasted, right? I do hundreds, possibly more than 1,000 deal reviews a year. And the vast majority of these deals suffer from no real connectivity to somebody who can actually make a decision. We'll talk about what that means. We'll talk about how do we know. But at the end of the day, that's a real problem. Significant opportunity cost, right? A long time ago, I had this visual, and I talked about time invested throughout the sales process, right? Cold calling may take a lot of our time. Prospecting may take a lot of our time, but on a per deal basis, it's minuscule, a few minutes, a few calls. First meeting, second meeting, presentations, discovery, proposal writing, negotiation. The more you get into the sales process, the deeper you get in, not only do you have a greater cumulative cost of investment, but each subsequent step requires more effort, right? So there's additional effort and the cumulative is growing. So you have this exponential investment over time. Every opportunity, that doesn't close costs you X amount of prospecting calls you could make, X amount of, new potential prospects you could reach out to. So it's not inconsequential, right? It's very common for people to say, well, working an opportunity that may or may not close, that's iffy, is better than doing nothing. Actually, it's not. I'll talk more about that later, but it's not. So significant opportunity costs, pipeline uncertainty kills companies, right? Not just careers, not just about, you and your job and not hitting quota, but ultimately not being able to close opportunities in a time frame that you intend to starves you of cash. That's highly problematic. I'm going to share a story about last year with one of the clients that I work with, where we were able to compress an enormous amount of pipeline into a very compact period, which ultimately had very positive outcomes for the company and also for the salesperson. That would not have been possible without laser-like focus on the decision process, the decision maker, et cetera, et cetera. Emotional toll, right? You get to the end of the month, the quarter of the year, whatever it is, and you feel pretty beat up. Working deals that never close, that disappointment is absolutely, crushing to your self-esteem, ultimately impedes your success. I really hate to see people disappointed in something that they could have avoided, that they could have figured out ahead of time, or they could have fixed. There's a funny little thing that happens too, and that is that no decision, when we believe we've been selling, right, to somebody and they're not buying, there we go. They're not buying. We got a rendering issue here. Okay, it's gone out. And they're not buying. We kind of get pissed off, right? We feel like we've been cheated. And that may not be that big of a deal, but if you understand over time that the way deals really work is there rarely is something like a 2-year sales cycle. There's really one sales cycle in any environment that has even moderate complexity. There tends to be an initial sales cycle where the prospect, talks to us, starts to explore their needs, starts to look at our solution, and then for some reason goes dark. Now, in a lot of companies, we keep that opportunity going. Oh, they'll talk to us next year, so we treat it like the same opportunity. I believe in killing that opportunity, starting a new one, and watching what happens. Because what you can see if you look at this with a real critical eye is most deals, quotes, there's my air quotes, deals are actually comprised of multiple discrete sales processes, multiple discrete opportunities that go for a little bit and then stop, go for a little bit and then stop, go for a little bit and then go across the finish line. That's a very different way of thinking about things than, hey, we just keep talking to them until they buy. The problem is if your prospect is, let's say, only able to or interested or really motivated to go, let's say, a third of the way through the sales process, but you expend all your energy thinking they're going through the full sales process, follow up, try to understand what's going on, try to get back in the calendar. When they finally tell you the truth, hey, actually, this is next year's initiative, you're pissed off, right? There's a lot of resentment towards them, which may create a barrier to going back and winning the deal later. Additionally, they're going to feel bad, right? People don't like deceiving you. Nobody ever calls you up and says, hey, we're not really going to do anything this year. And in fact, I've been tasked with a budgeting exercise as part of my MBO. So would you please spend a lot of time with me and tell me everything about your solution, provide pricing, do all this great stuff. And then I'm going to ignore you for another 6 to 9 months. And then maybe we'll do something later. Nobody says that. They say it's important, it's urgent, it's mission critical, it's this priority, that priority, what have you. And then they go dark, right? So your pissed off, resentment, whatever you want to call it, combined with their, frankly, embarrassment or shame at having misled you, creates resistance to coming back together when there actually is a real deal. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, please stick them in here. This matters. A couple more points I'll make on this. If there is no decision authority, no decision can be made. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, that no such thing as a sales process, no such thing as a buying process. There's actually a decision process. But absent a decision authority, if somebody is not able to make a decision, somebody hasn't been appointed to make the decision, no decision can be made. All of this is about avoiding this little thing called no decision, right? I shared with you that in one of the emails, 75% of all opportunities end in no decision. That's not true. It's more like 85 or 90%. I just want to put it in there and sound ridiculous, right? Where's that data come from? It comes from doing this for over a decade, for working with opportunities, tracking opportunities across, 20, 30, 40 clients a year. 85, 90% of the deals that are worked on end in do nothing. Think of the colossal waste of time. How much human capital, how much energy, how much anticipation is just dropped on the floor. No decision process also equals no decision. So the two things required to make a decision are a decision process, how's this going to happen, and someone in there who represents a decision authority. At the end of the day, somebody's got to say yes or no. If we don't know who that person is, we might need to ask ourselves, do they even exist? Here's my last point on this. This matters, this conversation today matters, because I will look you in the proverbial eye here and tell you with certainty, 100% of no decision situations are predictable. 100% of no decision situations are predictable. Now, that's probably an affront to a lot of folks listening to this, saying, well, I got plenty of deals where I didn't know, where they didn't tell me, what have you. Okay, I hear you, but I didn't know doesn't mean it's not knowable, right? One of the things that I do a lot is basically a variant on the after action review process. The military has a very specific format for learning from actions, things that happen, initiatives that they took. And it's basically a structure to create a feedback loop so that there can be iterative learning in a very hierarchical organization. So I do this with deals, right? I've done this for 2 decades at this point, going into opportunities and saying, okay, what went wrong? What happened? What could we have done differently? I have never in my entire career come across a situation where, when we go back and look at it, right? Remember, hindsight is 20/20, so I get that. The ability to understand the decision process, the decision authority, or lack thereof, was possible, right? Now, I'm not saying that's wrong or you're a bad person if you didn't do it, but I am saying that if you want to change your behavior, if you want your results to be different than they are today, you have to change your mindset, right? If your mindset in this moment is, well, sometimes you're just not going to know. Sometimes it's not knowable. Hey, shit happens. If that's your belief, well, then reality is going to mirror that belief, right? So one of the most important things I want to, impress upon you today is that you have a choice, right? I'm going to share all this great stuff with you and techniques and some cool tools and answer questions and blah, blah, blah. But when it comes right down to it, you have a choice, right? The choice is either keep believing that there's this unknowable thing called decision process, called decision authority, that sometimes can't be known. If you believe that to be true, you will never find it. If you believe that decision process, that decision authority is always knowable, then you will find it. Does that make sense? I'd love to hear at least a little chat response that this is about shifting your belief. I'm going to give you lots of tools, but if you leave this conversation here after an hour or 2 hours or however long I go on with the same belief system, well, I just can't know, it's not always knowable, you're not going to do anything different. Does that make sense? Tell us how. Good. Well, get cracking, they're saying. So here's part of the problem. We have in most selling environments Steve Hicks, great question. Ask me that at the end because your text is going to roll away, but good point. There's a set up fail scenario. We are under the illusion that we have some sort of a sales process, right? We draw some pictures. Trust me, I get paid to help people build sales process, right? Nice diagrams with boxes and arrows. And we think that's what represents the best way to sell. Maybe, maybe not. On the other side, the prospect has their uncertain, looks like we have a weird rendering issue. Oh, now we're going to get, has an informal or undefined buying process. Shouldn't say buying sales, should say buying process, right? Most companies, whatever you're selling, whether it's project management software or new telecom stuff, They don't have a binder, a leather-bound binder someplace with, here's how we buy telecom software or SaaS software or whatever the heck. They're making it up. They're trying to figure it out. Most people in a company aren't sure what to do past, I'm going to go buy a box of pencils and expense it. They don't actually know how the process works. So they're unsure. We have what we think is our process. Success is in the middle place, right? We only get success a small percent of the time when our process and their process overlap to achieve the desired outcome. So unfortunately, the way we're doing things today, thinking about sales process, thinking about buying process, is part of the problem. I did a webinar about 6 months ago, and I'll send it out as part of the package here, when we send out the recording. But what I said basically was, there's no such thing as a sales process or a buying process. There's actually a decision process. And selling as a whole is a combination of 3 distinct processes, right? There's stuff we do, conversations, prospecting, et cetera, that gets us into a conversation, that gets us in front of a prospect. But once we're there, once we've started to identify need, once we've identified pain, once we start to match up our solution with their desired outcome, well, all that really matters is, are we progressing to a decision process? Is there a date in the calendar where we've agreed that we're going to make a decision, yes or no, to move forward? Now, that's in another webinar. Like I said, I'll send it out. I don't want to belabor it. But once a decision is made, right? Yes, we want to do this. Then there's contracting and procurement, right? That's a whole nother process. Then there's implementation, right? Those are other processes, right? All of those processes have a very specific moment in time when we say, yes, this has been done. A decision process is complete when a decision has been made on the decision date. Contracting is complete when the contract is signed, and implementation is complete when we go live, and the rest of it is actually using our stuff. So hopefully that makes sense. I want to, once and for all, remove the concept of decision maker from the vernacular. I have, for the better part of at least a decade, been chastising folks for using this term, making fun of them. I could go on and on, but the idea is, part of the problem, part of the trap that we're in, is the language we use to describe this. Decision maker, as it says right here on the page, is a flawed concept. Who in this call doesn't make decisions? Well, we all do, right? When you say to somebody, are you the decision maker, right? You're setting yourself up to get bad information, right? Hey, how's it going? Good, right? That question wasn't designed to yield anything other than a very superficial surface answer, right? Hey, what's up, right? You the decision maker? Yes, I am. I decided to wear pants this morning, right? Well, you didn't ask me what I make decisions about or where the interface is others. When they say things like, this comes out of my budget, we don't even know what that means. We assume it means they have money, it's in their budget, maybe it's sitting in their drawer in a bucket full of gold guarded by a leprechaun that they get to take and use as they see fit. Or maybe it means it's a number that they put into a spreadsheet 6 months ago that somebody else asked them to do that they may or may not even have the authority to spend anymore, right? I doubt that very few people on this call have been through corporate budgeting processes, really understanding how they work. By the way, rebudgeting processes, right? I know some of you folks in leadership positions, Dave Squibb, have been through situations where you've given a budget, right? 3, 4, 5 months later, when revenue isn't where it's supposed to be, well, that budget gets pulled off the table. So when somebody says this comes out of my budget, I have budget for this, it's a nonsense statement. It doesn't tell you anything. It's my call. I make the decision. These sound like real sentences, but they're not. And I'm going to give you what you should say, but first I want you to really think about this and hopefully commit to stop saying decision maker. Hey, who's the decision? Have we identified the decision maker? Who's the real? I know I called this getting to the real decision maker because if I called it something else, what I call it, you wouldn't understand, it wouldn't show up. But the point is, decision maker is a bullshit construct. The questions you ask, will you be making the final, can I speak to the person responsible for? That really relates to when we're cold calling. One of the worst things you can do when you're cold calling, and this presentation is not about cold calling, but I want to say this, is calling up saying, I'd like to speak to this person responsible for, right? Who is responsible? Who makes decisions on this or that? Number one, you flag yourself as a vendor. Number two, you basically are begging them to send you to procurement, right? Because nobody who actually makes decisions wants to talk to somebody looking for somebody who makes decisions. Does that make sense? Yes? It's very quiet on the chat thing, so let me know if you're getting this. Cool. So from now on, ladies and gentlemen, I humbly ask that we retire once and for all this term decision maker. Don't say it. It's a nonsense word. Everybody you talk to makes decisions. Decisions about what they wear, decisions what to eat, decisions about, oh, that was interesting how that didn't work. Decisions about, whether they're interested, right? Influencers make a decision about whether to go to their boss and say, should I give you my opinion? Should we buy this? It doesn't mean anything with respect to the buying decision. I decided to wear pants today. All right. Here's what we're going to use moving forward. Person of authority, okay? In all of the implementations of sales process that I do with all of the, companies that I work with, we scratch out in felt tip marker. We take a Sharpie, big old Sharpie like this one here, and we redact, as they say in the government, decision maker. We stop using it. We make everybody pay $1 if they use the word like it's a cuss word. And we use the term called person of authority. The person of authority is the individual who possesses the authority to make a decision to purchase whatever the hell you're selling, right? From whatever the heck your company is on behalf of their company, right? Authority, decision, action, right? Purchase is an action. Authority is something they have to have. Decision is something that's going to happen. Purchase is the action that we need them to take in order for this thing to move forward. Now, here's the key. Without approval from anybody else, not without input, not without consideration, not without consulting, without approval, right? The individual who possesses the authority to make a decision to purchase some software from your company without asking anybody else doesn't mean they won't ask them, right? Now, we're going to get into a little mechanics and a little bit of how exactly do you ask that, what are the nuances, et cetera. But this is the definition. Any human being that you encounter can answer this question. Now, they may avoid answering. They may try to avoid answering the question, or they may not know how to answer the question. Those are all possibilities, but the question is answerable, right? Think about your own life. Think about your own world for a minute, right? There are things that you have the authority to decide to purchase without asking anybody else, right? If you're married, right? You either have spoken or unspoken rules about, what you're going to do without having a conversation. You might not want to come home, park the Porsche in the driveway, and say to your wife, hey, look what I got. Isn't this cool? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I'd say in most cases, that's one of those decisions to purchase that you don't have the authority to do without asking somebody else, right? You may or may not, I don't know. But, you're not going to say, can I stop and get a cup of coffee on the way home? So in every organization, there are absolute rules that govern authority, making decisions about purchasing, right? Sometimes they're informal. Mostly they are formal. The bigger they come together, the more formal they are. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So, new terminology. As I said, POA is a person. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this little gem here, the famous movie Highlander, but I wanted to make a point that just like in the movie Highlander, there can be only one person of authority. Not two, not three, not a committee. There is one and only one. There is one person who can say yes when everybody else says no, and there's one person who can say no when everybody else says yes. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about this? What about that? I'm going to go through all sorts of examples, right? But there is only one person. Actually, heck, I'll go through it a little bit quickly right now. In every organization, there is somebody for each level of purchase for whatever they're trying to procure, buy, invest in. There's somebody who has the authority to say yes. Now, at the end of the day, there could be those who supersede that person. Or at the end of the day, a CEO could say no to anybody. The chairman of the board can say no to everybody below that. And ultimately, the shareholders, which would be the only case there isn't just one person of authority, can say no to everybody underneath that. But what we're talking about is for the level of decision we're looking to have made based on dollar amount, based on category, what have you, there is one person you're looking for who can say yes when everybody else says no, and no when everybody else says yes. That's actually, in case you guys remember, that's an old Miller Hyman thing for the economic buyer. First time I heard that was about 15, 17 years ago. We'll keep going on this one. So now that we've said no more decision maker, now that we've agreed to use the term person of authority, let's let's chat a little bit about where in the process the POA gets involved. How does the person of authority actually, pay attention to stuff? Well, the line you see, that curve, let's call that level of involvement energy, how much time they're going to spend. And the stages, if you will, are logical stages of a sales cycle. Now, a lot of the questions that you ask, like what about a buying process where there is no POA involved, right? Where somebody is exploring options and then they're going to bring it to POA. I'm giving you a little bit of a peek at what's coming a little bit later, but I'm going to tell you right now, if there's no POA involved, there is no decision to be made. You're having a conversation about something that might happen in the future, but it's not an actual buying process. That doesn't mean you stay away. That doesn't mean you don't get involved with them, but understand, if you're talking to somebody and there is no POA or the POA is not involved, you're not actually in a real sales cycle. You're in a pre-sales cycle. That's part of our world. That's how this world works, but it's not the real sales cycle. It's a fake. Somebody made a comment, said, wow, they drop out at the most important part of the cycle for us. Yes, they do. In most cases, if you're coming in at the point where your prospect is evaluating vendors, your POA just walked out the door, just left the room, and you're sitting there talking to the functional folks who don't actually have authority. Now, depending on the depending on the buying environment, depending on the company, depending on what you're selling, that may be just the way it is. Obviously, it's going to be to our advantage to be up here in the category of identifying problems and opportunities, helping the POA come up with initiatives. That really is the world of latent need selling, but not all of us get to play there. Some of us are in existing need selling. We show up at the moment where they say, great, we're going to do something. Let's go talk to some vendors. Know that the POA in that point is at their lowest motivation to talk to anybody. The question then is, well, what do? You may never get to the POA if you're down here, but you need to understand how the POA is connected to this, or you may need to walk from the deal. More on that in a moment. So let's talk about how decisions to invest, to solve problems are really made. I do hundreds, maybe 1,000 a year opportunity reviews. It's my favorite thing that I do, right? On a weekly basis, I'm going through pipelines, talking about deals. I'm asking very simple but important questions about need, timing, buying process, POA, dates, etc. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I study and I think about, how do decisions get made? What moment in time does something actually happen? So what I'm going to share with you are the scenarios where decisions are being made. I'm also going to show you that in some cases, conversations that you're having may not actually have a decision to be made, in which case I would argue they're not really a deal, right? They're not really a buying process. They are conversations, and conversations can lead to decisions. But it really is important to understand is the thing that I'm dealing with, is the conversation, is the engagement that I'm involved in sitting in the context of a decision process, or does it live before it, right? Again, neither is right or wrong. It's not bad or good. We, a lot of times, get drawn into, I'm talking about we in the collective, we as sales professionals, we get drawn into situations, at all sorts of places. When people are just thinking about ideas, when people are, evaluating vendors and need to make a decision by Friday, all sorts of possible combinations. So it's important to know, am I in the context of a conversation that includes a decision or not? And what I'd ask you to think about is, I know you've got personal experiences with folks who in your life, right? Could be personal, could be family, could be professional, who never can get to a decision, right? They just keep talking, right? There's a famous scene in Glengarry Glen Ross where I think it's Al Pacino is sort of bursting the bubble for one of the other guys, that these folks he's been talking to aren't actually ever going to buy anything because he's talked to them before. They don't have an intention to buy anything. They don't have any money. They just like talking to salespeople, right? I'm not suggesting that. Well, actually, I am suggesting a lot of the people out there like talking to salespeople. They like seeing what's new. They like keeping fresh of ideas. They like filling their day with stuff that keeps them from having to go to meetings at their own company, that keeps them from having to answer email or gets them through the end of the day. So if you're going to distinguish between conversations that might lead to a decision, looks like we got some rendering issues here, and an actual decision process, you need to understand, am I in a decision or not? I'm going to, I don't know what I can do about this chat thing. I think the chat thing's messing up. Doesn't matter. So one scenario is that a person of authority solely by themselves evaluates options and make a decision. If you're talking to a person of authority, right? Think about a small company where you're talking to the CEO or the founder. They don't have a lot of committees. They don't have people they delegate to. They make the decisions. They're evaluating the options. They're going to make a decision themselves. That's very simple, kind of decision scenario. A perhaps more common scenario, particularly in a larger company, is the person of authority delegates the process of making recommendations, right? We're going to stick on this for a little bit because it's kind of pretty important. So person of authority is sitting there and saying, wow, we need to look at options for this and options for that, and we need to solve this problem. Hey, Bob, why don't you go in and talk to some vendors and see what you can come up with. Come back with your recommendations, right? That's a common scenario. Now, do you think that the person who's now out with, at least in theory, the sanction of the person of authority, we'll call them our point of contact, do you think that they're going to wander around and tell everybody they work with that they're not actually important, right? What vendor is going to return a call from somebody who says, hey, I'm calling from ABC company. My CEO sent me on a project to start investigating, new solutions for, CRM. But I just want to be clear. I really don't have any authority here. I can't make any decisions. I'm just going to be providing a recommendation, which, gosh, he might not even accept. He may do nothing anyway. No, they don't say that. Everybody overestimates their power, authority, influence. If you've ever been to a trade show, you know this for a fact. Everybody at a trade show, somehow, in exchange for a squishy ball is going to tell you that they are the person who actually, I'm the real decision maker. It goes to the CEO, but really she takes my recommendations, right? We've heard this before. How many times are you going to fall for that, right? Know that there is no such thing as, it's not no such. It is very rare that a POA delegates a decision. And I'm going to give you some exceptions in a minute, but the vast majority of cases when the POA is not present, they are delegating the recommendations, investigation, evaluation, whatever recommendations process, right? Very, 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 very rarely have they actually delegated the decision, right? The POA lets me do what I want. The CIO always lets me make that's a load of horse shit. All I can tell you is I've been watching these deals for years and years, and every single time, with very few exceptions, somebody says, no, this person gets to have their way, but the other person just rubber stamps it. It doesn't actually happen. I know you all have your one story of the time it actually did work, right? It's like the gambler who is $20,000 in the hole, but can tell you the one time that they were up $100,000, but now they're 20,000 down overall. You only remember the good stuff. It's very rare. This never happens. In no world that exists does a person of authority approves a non-POA to make a decision without ever consulting them, right? Even if it happened, it still wouldn't happen. And here's why. That person, right, would be too scared to make the decision without at least running it by somebody else and getting their approval. I've literally been in situations where at the end of the deal, I asked the person of authority, could our point of contact have just said yes without even coming to you, right? A lot of times they say, well, no, they had to come to me anyway. But the very few times that they said, well, yeah, they could have, when I went back to the non-POA, the point of contact, and said, why didn't you just make the call? The answer is, well, I wanted to make sure, it didn't go against what they were looking for, right? So people who are not actual persons of authority, even when they're delegated an authority to make a decision, are very, very uncomfortable making that decision. They don't want to screw up, right? This is corporate politics 101. You guys know this. You've been in these organizations. People are afraid to look bad. People are afraid to make a mistake, right? This is another fun one of mine. Well, we're building a case, and then we'll bring it to the POA. So, and we'll talk about this in more detail. So, do they know you're talking to us about CRM? Do they know you're talking to me about consulting? Well, no, but we're building a case. Okay, how are you building a case without a business problem that the POA has asked you to solve, right? You're going to do all this work, and you're going to drop it on their desk, hoping that it's something they want to do? That's really confusing. So this is an example, a very clear example of a situation that's not really a decision. Now, this does happen. I'm not saying when the person, the point of contact says they're building a case without a POA, you walk. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there is no decision that's going to be made until the person of authority is involved. So you need to behave differently. You need to act differently. You need to think differently. You need to not put this in your pipeline at 80% with a high probability of close because, you know, the person says they're meeting with the POA next week to run it by them, right? We'll talk about how do you work those situations through. What exactly do you do? Hope you guys are doing good. Any questions, jump in. Trying to move fairly quickly along here. How are we doing on time? So when we're dealing with this concept of person of authority, what matters? What matters, what doesn't matter? I'll be very clear. A lot of people think when I'm talking about this that what I'm saying is get to the POA, C-level selling, you know, selling to veto. No. There are environments where what you're selling is just not important enough. Doesn't matter enough. The POA is still the POA. You're not going to get there, right? It's all relevant to the size of a company. At a, I don't know, $1 million company, $2 million company, anything over about $20 is going to require a meeting with the CEO, right? At a $1 billion company, your measly little $100,000 deal is not going to get you an audience with the CEO or whoever the POA is. Your deal still needs to get approved there, still needs to go through the channels. You're not getting in the room. So don't stop thinking about it. Stop worrying about it. You do need to know who they are, right? More importantly, you need to understand their motivation and the connectivity between you, the person, the point of contact, your primary point of contact, and the person of authority. What is their relationship? How are they interacting? What directives are they operating under, right? What measures of success is the conversation you're having with them tied to ultimately? One of the most important concepts, if you are getting to the person of authority, is the concept of how do you get access, which we'll talk about it, and return access. One of the things that came up thematically in the questions was, well, the POA was involved early on, but they're not now. How do I get back? Well, if you left the room without what I call sanction for return access, you may be out of luck, right? It really comes down to how do you set the situation up for success. If I'm talking to the person of authority and they say, great, sounds awesome, go run do, right? That usually means go run do with people below me who I pay to do this stuff for me, right? And then I say, well, I want to come back and talk to you. Well, if I didn't get agreement in that first meeting to come back to them and I didn't make my case for it, right? Well, good luck. Simple way you might handle that would be as follows. If you're in the context of a person of authority meeting with your points of contact, the non-POAs, making sure that you get commitment in that moment for return access sounds something like this. Hey, Mrs. Johnson, really appreciate you meeting today, giving us proper direction so that I can work with your team on how we're going to move forward. Listen, a lot of times, month, 2 months down the road, when we're really getting close to identifying the solution that's going to meet your guys' needs, it's really difficult to get back, you know, on your calendar, back on your radar. I know you trust your people, et cetera, but I'm sure that on behalf of myself and the people that you're going to have us work with, it's in everybody's best interest for us to plan on returning back here in, why don't we say 2 months, to share with you the joint recommendations we put together, the plan we have for moving forward, blah, 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 whatever. You know, can we go ahead and put that on your calendar, work with your assistant to get back here in a couple months to make sure we haven't missed anything, and more importantly, to make sure that none of your needs, imperatives, directives, what have you, have shifted, right? That sounds great. Okay, I have return access. I have permission to come back. I'm going to walk out of that boardroom. I'm going to go to the executive assistant for that CEO or person of authority, or whatever they are, and say, hey, I need to get on the calendar 2 months from now. Mrs. Johnson just said she wants to make sure we're back here in 2 months. So if you want to get return access, get it up front. Selling through is really what we're talking about, right? If you can get to the POA and they are involved throughout the process, it's not really a problem, right? We don't have a whole lot of conversation here. Pretty boring presentation, right? Today is not about if I'm talking to the person of authority and they're involved in the whole process, what do I do, right? The hard part is I can't get there, or I get there and they kick me out, or what have you. So when we're talking about selling through non-POA, we have to acknowledge that there are really two decision processes, right? There's two separate and discrete decision processes. There's the overall decision process that we're working through, myself and the non-person of authority. And then there's the person of authority decision, meaning somebody at some point has to go to that person of authority and say, hey, we're going to make a decision, yes or no, but we need your permission to do so, right? In a lot of cases, that's our point of contact, right? And no matter how you configure it, whether we know what's going to happen, whether it's pre-planned, et cetera, a lot of our sales processes, a lot of our deals go like this: talking to somebody, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I got to go talk to somebody else and come back. Well, my question is, did you know that ahead of time? Did you, have an idea of what was involved there, right? How is this individual going to communicate to the person of authority at the right time? What I see most often is pretty dysfunctional, right? You got a salesperson working through a point of contact. They love it. All the conversations, we're doing this, we're doing that, the other thing. Somewhere along this whole process, it emerges that they have to actually talk to somebody else, right? Oh, I got to run up the flagpole. We got to, approach it through the proper channels. I got to take it to the committee. That's my favorite one. Who is this magical committee, by the way? Well, something is going on there, right? It's not actually a black box, right? It's not actually, magic happening in there. That person has to physically connect with somebody else in the organization who has the authority to say yes, physically present them with whatever it is we've been talking about, and get a decision. So how exactly is that going to work, right? What do we know about that process? Who is involved? How exactly will this happen? I always tell sort of a funny story that I believe is how most deals, most opportunities, new opportunities are created when you're selling to large organizations. I can actually smell this when I'm talking to a sales team or a salesperson about, hey, there's this deal we're working, and they're explaining the details of it, how it got started, et cetera. But here's my humorous version. Some mid-level, what do they call them? High potential folks, real go-getter, has identified a problem and is excited about, potentially looking at solutions to solve for it. Maybe it's some new, database software. So you got the mid-level IT person wandering through the halls, and the other way down the hall comes the CIO, right? And, grumpy old CIO kind of walk along, and the junior folks says, hey, Bob, good to see you. Hey, it's John, right? Yeah, good to see you too. Hey, listen, some of the guys on my team, we've been looking at some of this software that might actually accelerate some of the, the database uploads and downloads and improve security, blah, 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 right? Because, he wants to look good. Well, Bob, I think his name is Bob, the CIO, having properly taken his sensitivity training, or maybe just being really, really busy, says, oh, sounds interesting. Yeah, looking forward to hear about that, right? That's it. Keeps walking. What happens next? Well, John, through the magic of, how our brain works, heard something very different. John heard, I just got the CIO's permission to investigate solutions and start calling vendors. Goes back to his team. Guys, great news. The CIO approved us working on this project on an exploratory manner, of course, but, it has to go back to him. But, we're good to go. We can start calling some folks, looking at solutions. Let's build some requirements. Let's get some vendors in here. Let's do some demos, right? The magical mystery machine spins up and months go by. Vendors are putting this in their pipeline, taking trips, taking people to dinner, doing presentations, working on pricing, putting stuff in their forecast. And it comes down to the point where somebody actually has to go back and talk to the CIO. And what the vendors hear is, yep, we're bringing it for final approval next week, trying to get it on the CIO's calendar. We got an approval meeting. We're going to review our findings and our recommendations and get his go ahead, right? Get the authority to go ahead. See where this is going? Well, a couple weeks of being pushed away, and finally they get on the CIO's calendar. Meanwhile, we've heard this on the sales side. Oh, it didn't come up last week, got pushed, our meeting's moving out a week, really trying to get on his calendar. Well, when that junior to mid-level folk person finally gets in front of the CIO with the entire packet of all this stuff, and here's the work we done, here's the presentation, you can see the CIO's face just to start to get really confused. What are you talking about? What is going on? Well, sir, this is that database, project, the thing, we were talking about a couple months ago, and the guy literally is going, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've got a whole nother committee working on other things. This is not even this budget this year. I'm sorry you misunderstood me. I did not say go and, create a project. I didn't say go talk to vendors. I just said that sounds interesting. Now, the guy comes back to his team. He's feeling a little foolish, feeling a little embarrassed. Do you think he actually owns up to the fact that he's been hallucinating for the past 3 months? No, of course not. Guys, thought there was a lot of great ideas in here. Probably gonna have to push it. Let's call the vendors back. Let them know we're probably gonna have to push a couple months. Is this sounding familiar to you guys? Right? You're getting from your prospect all this false information, and then false. We got to push it next quarter. Priorities have shifted. Right? I've heard every single one of the bullshit answers, responses, explanations. It's bullshit. It was never a deal in the first place. The person of authority had no idea these conversations were going on, right? Everybody takes out of the forecast. We're missing quarters. We're missing the year, right? We didn't miss our, missed our comp plan. And we whine about it and we cry and we say, oh, it was so close. And man, we just got snaked at the last minute. Oh, it's too bad. You were never in the game. You were completely deluding yourself when you could have known the truth. Sorry to bust your bubble, but that is how a lot of these deals actually happen. So, how do you know for sure? How do we know for sure if we're talking to the person of authority? Well, I hate to break this to you, but it's pretty dang simple. You ask, right? Now, it's actually not that simple. But there's a moment in time where, we'll talk about when do you find out, when we need to know, not guess, not hope, not think, not suspect, but know if I'm talking to the person of authority or not. It's a pretty simple question. Do you, Bob, have the authority to make a decision to, it's not supposed to say move, it's to purchase this accounting software package on behalf of Johnson Controls Company without approval from anybody else? Now, I want to be very clear. This is a simple question, but asking the question is not simple, all right? There's fear. There's how am I going to be perceived? There is what are they going to say? And then there's the actual answer, right? The beauty and sort of the sadness of the decision maker question is it gives everybody an easy out. When I ask, are you the decision maker? Everybody gets a free pass, right? Because I could say, yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, it's an easy answer because there's no real substance there. When I ask a question with this level of specificity, it's going to get a little bit uncomfortable, right? Well, certainly I consult with others. Well, of course you do, Bob. My question is this: do you have to? Right? You'd be foolish not to seek the advice of others, but if you wanted to, could you pull the trigger without asking? I'm talking about from a pure authority standpoint. I'm being a little glib here, but I want to take this very seriously. Asking matters. It's the most important thing. How you ask and how you follow up to the answer to those questions. If you're asking a question simply to get the answer that you want to have, you're not going to ask this question. When you ask, are you the decision maker? Who makes the final decision? You're trying to reinforce the belief in something that you want to have happen, right? There's words for that. There's names for that. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. When you ask this question, I want to be very blunt with you. Do you have the authority to make a decision, to move forward, to make a purchase of this product, my company, without having to ask anybody else? You now have to have a conversation to unpack that. Well, what do you mean? Well, I mean, authority. Has your company granted you the authority to make a purchase in the amount of $150,000, right? Signing authority, decision authority, budget authority, or does that request have to go to somebody else in order for it to be valid? Based on the rules of your company, do you have the authority to make that decision? Well, I'm not really sure. Great. At least we're being honest, right? Let's talk about it. Now, how do you ease into this question, right? How do you say it tactfully? Well, I'll talk about this in a little bit, but a great wise man by the name of Mahan Khalsa, and his name will be later in the presentation, wrote a book called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. And he had a fantastic saying, which was intent counts more than technique. And the reality is, if you are asking in a selfish way, from a selfish standpoint, people will resist. Well, I need to know because my manager says I can't, get professional services involved, or I got to shut down unless I can prove that you're the person with authority, right? That sounds very selfish. Sounds very confrontational. But let's really talk about, why do we need to know? Why is it critical to understand person of authority? Well, what if instead of speaking purely from my own selfish standpoint, what I said was, well, let's be realistic here. At the end of the day, I like working with you. I think we've identified some problems, that your company's looking to face. I think we've come up with some potentially good solutions and ways to solve for that will complement things you're already doing. At the end of the day, though, that's going to require investment. And I would sure hate to see the work you and I are doing hit a brick wall here in 3 months after lots of investment, lots of meetings, et cetera, because we didn't think to ask a question that's really important, which is, who actually has the ability to say yes to this thing? And if it's you, great. But let's really ask that critically. Notice I'm saying let's and we. It's not who's the decision maker, you tell me. Right? It's, we need to understand this, right? This actually matters. Why is it so hard? Well, prospects have great intentions, right? We get caught up in the moment. They're excited about this. Just like us, they want something to happen, right? If we're talking to somebody and they're excited about our solution, chances are it solves a problem for them that's making their life difficult, all right? They want the outcome we want. Well, wanting an outcome can be a problem in that it may cause you to ignore evidence that it's not going to happen, right? You've all been there on a beautiful day when you're supposed to head to the park and you see the clouds. I'm sure it'll be fine, right? I don't want it to rain today, so I'm going to ignore evidence that suggests it's going to rain. There's a myth in selling that working a deal is better than not working a deal. Well, working a deal that never closes is actually far more detrimental than working on nothing. Because if you're working on nothing, you have to go prospect. You have to find something else. You feel motivation. The greatest killer, I think, of careers, or certainly of people hitting quota, is filling your pipeline with stuff that's never going to close. But I lie to myself and say, well, this is better than nothing. Hey, you never know, right? My favorite expression is, well, hey, could happen. Everybody knows hope's not a strategy, yet in real life and behavior, because, having to actually go prospect and find other things to do is uncomfortable. We tend to work stuff long after we should have put a bullet in its head, right? Everyone, like I said, has a story about the time it worked out just fine. And in fact, because most of our deals aren't really pursued with a level of clarity, a level of obsessiveness that I like to think about, right? Most of the deals that we've worked in our lives haven't had clear line of sight to the person of authority. We haven't done this. So it's very easy to justify why this is not necessary to do, why we can wait, why it's not all that important, why, we don't want to upset anybody, right? The other two things, and I'll show you a funny cartoon. The brain is really fascinating, right? We are not wired as Homo sapiens to see the truth, to see reality. We're not, right? There's so much information coming at us. The brain is very, very good at selectively determining, what really should be paid attention to and what's not. That's good news. The bad news is, like an Etch-a-Sketch, it can take a lot of it and just kind of make it go away, right? Time and time again, it's been shown that the way our brain works is looking for evidence to support the belief of an outcome that we desire versus the opposite, and rejecting evidence to the contrary. We will take, hardcore black and white evidence that this is going south and basically ignore it, right? Wipe it out. It's not there. I won't go into my whole cognitive, science, subconscious, creative subconscious spiel, but the idea is you have to accept that you actually suck. We all suck at getting to the truth. We're not good at it, right? I've sat through, again, I keep saying this, so many of these opportunity, sessions, looking at opportunities, evaluating them, with people trying to convince me that everything's going fine. There's, obvious evidence as to why this thing is not going to happen. And either they haven't seen it, they never considered it, or when I bring it up, they say, oh, that doesn't happen, right? It's how the brain works. So, like I said, if you want to change your behavior, if you want different results, I want to close more deals. I want to not waste time on deals that don't close. If that's your desired outcome, you have to change your belief system on a couple of things. One, right? You have to stop believing that finding the POA is hard or impossible or unknowable, and shift it to actually, in every single situation that is going to result in a purchase, in a deal, it is knowable, right? So shift that belief. The second is you have to accept that the tools currently at your disposal, your brain, your eyes, your ears, your mouth, are actually not very good, right? They don't work really well. Why? Because this is emotional. When we're progressing towards a deal, it's something we want to happen. Anything we want to happen, right? We're going to look for evidence to support that it's going to happen and reject the rest. So that's why we build systems. That's why we build process. That's why we will build tools. I'm going to show you in a couple slides some tools that I use that make it very hard for these dysfunctional eyes and ears and mouth to hide the truth from us, right? If you use the tools, it's very difficult for the brain to do what it wants to do, which is to overwrite or etch-a-sketch evidence that this is not happening. So more on that in a minute. This is a fun little Dilbert cartoon. I'll let you read it for a second. But it talks about the concept of cognitive dissonance. Scott Adams, the author, the author of cartoons, whatever, the Dilbert creator, put out a book recently, which I highly recommend. It's called Win Bigly, and it's all about persuasion in a world where facts don't matter. And this is not a political conversation, but he talks about the great surprise and chagrin and all the stuff that happened through the election, right? Our most recent election, and how, people predicted this and predicted that, and everybody was shocked. And actually what he said was, none of this was surprising if you could see past cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is very simple to understand. Your brain is running a movie reel about the way things are supposed to be, right? Sky is blue, earth is round, this is right, this is wrong, etc. When something else comes along that does not agree with the movie we're playing, right? And the movie could be affected by our culture, by our upbringing, by where we live, by our race, by our ethnicity, maybe those are the same things, by our gender. We all have our own, yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Aaron, for putting that up there. We all have our own movie playing, right? When something happens that is incongruous with that movie, our brain automatically and immediately creates an exception, right? Says, well, here's why that happened, even though that doesn't normally happen. That's a one-time thing, right? And keeps the movie playing. We don't like switching reels. It's very, very difficult. We don't actually search for truth. So if you think that your powers of perception are strong. If you think you hear the truth, my favorite sketch, well, I heard them say this. Actually, 3 people in the room listening would have heard 3 separate sentences. They've done studies where they have, a crime scene or something that happens where there's multiple camera angles on this, and they have eyewitnesses, all who give a completely different account of what actually happened. Are they crazy? No, they saw different things. Reality is subjective. Reality is not objective. Reality is what happens in your mind, not happens in the world. I'm not going to make a big, thing about that, but read the book, understand cognitive dissonance, and learn to accept the fact that if you don't create objective tools to manage this process, you are relying on a very faulty mechanism to see reality, to see the truth, and it's going to cost you. So it's really about our fear, right? It's our fear of what we want to have happen, not actually happening, right? It's our fear about hearing the truth. I can't tell you how many deals I've consulted on, coached on, what have you, where the truth was one question away. One question, simple question, not even an offensive question. But we didn't ask the question. Why didn't we ask the question? Well, I love the Etch-a-Sketch example. Like an Etch-a-Sketch, our fear takes the obvious question that's sitting right in front of us, all right, and goes, shake, 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 shake. You're out of here. And we don't ask it. Why didn't you ask that question? Oh, I forgot. No, you didn't forget. The little voice in your head called fear said, we don't want to ask that question. These are not the droids you're looking for, huh? So this is from Mahan Khalsa. I'm probably going to do something. I'm going to do something that I probably shouldn't, and that is, I have a copy of the original "Let's Get Real, Let's Not Play" course. It's like 10 CDs. It was like several $1,000s back in the day, but nobody even has a CD player. I'm going to load that onto a Dropbox folder. It's all audio. It's actually written by Mahan. Read by Mahan. That's the word. I'm going to put it up on a Dropbox and send it as part of the, post what do we call this, masterclass care package there. But the greatest sales process, training, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, ever of all time. But one of the things that he talked about is asking hard questions in a soft way. How do you actually ask the hard question? Because ultimately selling to be successful requires that you have some tough conversations, or at least what we perceive to be tough, right? You don't ask in real life, right? You don't go to the grocery store and say, do you have the authority to sell me these apples, right? That's silly. Most of the things in our lives, we, kind of go with the flow and take for granted, et cetera. But in this world called selling, it actually matters that we get the information we need. So it really is, how do you get important information is what the slide should be called. The first thing is you have to be cool with intent counts more than technique. How you ask does not matter as much as where you're asking from up here. And just to be very simple with this, if I'm asking a question to manipulate, to control, to gain access to information I can use against you, you're going to resist. I can spend all the time I want wordsmithing and doing this or that, but if I'm coming from a place that is not treating you as an equal, not looking for mutual advantage, then that question is going to be perceived as confrontational, offensive, impolite. Conversely, if your intention is actually to serve the prospect, right? And let's face it, asking about buying process serves the prospect. Asking about person of authority serves the prospect just as much as it serves us, because if they're desirous of the outcome, that outcome will never be attained, and lots of time will be wasted if we don't find that out, if it doesn't happen. I'll give you a really extreme example. When I'm working with a smaller business, CEO, founder, et cetera, $1 million, $2 million company, one of the first questions I ask in the first meeting that I'm in with them is, tell me about your relationship with your family, your wife, your kids, right? That's a pretty freaking personal question, right? Very rarely somebody says, why are you asking? I have a simple answer, but the point is most of the time people don't even ask, they just start talking, because I believe they perceive the truth, which is I'm not asking to find some little gotcha to use against them. I'm asking because I actually care and I believe it's critically important, right? See, I was an entrepreneur. I had a small company. I felt the effects of that on my family, and that's something that matters to a lot of people. When you ask difficult questions, you actually have to shut up and listen for an answer. This is one of the most basic tenets of great selling, and that is choose your questions carefully and then stop talking, right? Don't be waiting for the next question. If something is showing up, find a way to ask about it. Bob, I got to tell you, I have this deep sense of discomfort about where we're headed because I don't really understand how you guys will move towards a decision, right? And how our conversations will turn into something that benefits your company. So I'd like your permission to ask you a really hard question. One of the great techniques is ask permission to ask a tough question, right? I feel like I need to ask you a question, and I'm kind of nervous about it because I don't know. A little voice says, maybe he's going to hate me and get offended. So can I ask you a hard question? Ask one question at a time, right? It is about asking hard questions in a soft way. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's okay to ask for evidence. When somebody says, here's how this works, it's okay to say to them, that's fantastic. I got to ask you another tough question, though. How do you know that? Have you done it before? Right? I wouldn't do this because this is multi-part questions, but how do you know that's the way this works? Well, I built the process. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's move on. Okay. If you guys have questions, dump them in here. This is getting to the good stuff. Let's talk about some tools, some things you can use like today. The brain is amazing, right? We have this absolutely incredible, magical supercomputer that we use, jack squat of up here. And the way the brain works is actually the opposite of the way most people think. The brain doesn't do very well at sequential, do this, do that, the other thing. What it does really good at is envisioning, defining, creating a desired outcome, and then moving towards it, right? If you want to accomplish something, start with the end in mind. You've all heard that, right? Well, the most simple tool for creating a desired outcome, articulating it, and establishing your intention is, that's right, a meeting agenda, a pre-meeting email saying, hey, here's what I want to cover, right? Why not disclose with clarity what you're hoping to accomplish? I'm sure if I asked you guys to share what % of you send a purposeful, intentional, simple like this, pre-meeting articulation of objectives, 100% of the time, the answer would be zero. None of you do it. Some of you do it sometimes. My guess is some of you do it with a lot less specificity than this. But imagine you're going into a conversation and you've determined that one of the things you need to know is how are they going to make a decision process? How are they going to decide who's the person of authority? Put it in an email to them, right? This is an email that actually my wife sent out to a client she's been working, right? This was her second meeting, and we were, getting together and talking about what did she want to accomplish during the meeting. Naturally, like a lot of folks, what she said was, well, I want to give them a better understanding. But I guess, wait a minute, those are hows, they're not wheres, right? HOW versus WHERE. Where do you want to be at the end of this meeting? What information do you want to see? Well, I want to understand, how they're going to buy. Okay, great. I want to understand what they're trying to get to. Great. And I want to have another meeting. Good. What's the meeting? Proposal framework review. This is the email that went out. This took about an hour, right? Because initially what she was doing is trying to come up with all sorts of fancy ways of saying this. How do why are you trying to conceal the fact of what you're looking to ask for? Well, can I ask it like simpler? Of course you can. Will they get offended? I don't know. If they do, wouldn't that be a little strange? If somebody gets offended by this, tell me what that would sound like. Well, why do you need to know about decision process? Okay, well, because if you and I are going to spend a much time together, we probably want to think a little bit about how actually a decision would be made so we don't come up with the world's greatest idea and then have it fall off the map and all that time go to waste because we didn't think to ask an obvious question. What I just modeled for you there is a very simple principle, right? In work that I do in coaching and training, virtually everything that I share with folks that, hey, this is a good process, you should be doing this, they come back with, hey, well, what about this situation? What about that? The problem is the brain can come up with infinite ways, infinite scenarios of how this is not going to work. In reality, there are a finite number of ways this is not going to work. So what I would typically say is, okay, let's pretend you're concerned about the prospect getting offended by that question. How would that sound? What would they say back? What would the email response be? Which forces all the ethereal fear-based thoughts into very specific and structured, what would a human being say? Well, I'm not sure we need to make that, we need to figure that out right now. Okay, that's a logical response. What would you say back to it? So, quick coaching tip, if you're feeling concerned about something, get it out of your head, get into a conversation with somebody about how they would react to it. Hey, I've got a concern. Grab one of your buddies, grab somebody else in your team and say, I've got a concern that they're going to be pissed off. So I want you to play the pissed off CIO, me asking about this, and let's role play it a little bit. What you'll find is immediately when the words come out of your mouth, the situation is simpler and the problem really isn't as scary as you thought it would be. So prior to meetings, establishing intention through a pre-meeting agenda objectives email is the most powerful way to get what you want, right? If you want to understand this buying process, rather than having to ask an awkward question or thinking it's going to be really weird, tell them in the email that's what you want to cover in the meeting, right? That's part of your agenda. Notice I said in there, here's what I want. Make sure you tell me what you want. In terms of post-meeting, right, I'm a big fan of confirmation emails, right? I'll show you a sample in a minute. But the idea is every single meeting of importance should have a recap at the end, right, that represents verifiable evidence that you heard what you thought you heard, that the prospect said, yes, that's what I said, right? If you accept that the eyes and the ears and the mouth are imperfect mechanisms to interpret reality, it makes sense to create a system that backs them up. Now, a confirmation email isn't perfect, right? Still could be subject to the same challenges, i.e., the person skims it and says, yeah, that's right, and they didn't really read it. But I'm going to send you a very clear written email at the end of the meeting that requests confirmation and outlines exactly what I thought I heard and make sure we're on the same page. Here's the check, or here's the catch, though, or here's the trick. I write those emails before the meeting even happens. So one of the interesting little ninja tricks here, and I'll give you a specific example in a minute, is prior to a meeting, if I'm coaching a rep, what I'll say is, okay, first thing I want you to do is come up with your desired objectives, and we get very clear on what are you trying to come away with, not what's going to happen during the meeting, how you're going to feel, et cetera, but what tangible evidence of an advance do you want to have happen? This is before the meeting. Great. Take those objectives. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to put them into a recap email, draft it out, and then I want you to send a pre-meeting. All of this stuff is done before the meeting ever happens. Hoping you're hearing that. If you have any questions, shoot them up there. But I will tell you that one of the most powerful things you can do to get through your own fear, concern, misinformation, what have you, related to person of authority is make sure that's part of a systematic process of articulating objectives before the meeting, sending a confirmation email, all of which can be done before you even sit down. Here's an example of a week recap, right? This is a recap that's not really gonna get you anywhere. Now, I highlighted in red, but in reality, those things would be buried and unintelligible, right? Will be the person who signs off on the contract, right? So that's weak language. That's not having authority. And it's sort of buried in here on the third line, right? People don't read this email for clarity. At the same time, there is no explicit request for response. Please correct me if I'm wrong, right? This is an actual recap that somebody wrote. Here's an example of a powerful recap, right? Very simple, right? I've said this in other presentations, but email is a tricky medium these days because Most of the time, people don't read it thoroughly. They either act now on it, put it in the I'll deal with later pile, or they delete it. Hopefully, if you're in a relationship with them, then they will act now or deal with later. You need them to act now. Meeting recap, please reply. By the way, of course, at the end of meeting, I've said, hey, Bob, I'm going to be sending you in the next 10 minutes a recap of our meeting. How can I do it in 10 minutes? Oh, yeah, that's right. I wrote it before the meeting. I'm going to be sending you a recap of our meeting. Please take a quick look. And if correct, I'd like you to hit reply and tell me, yep, we are in agreement. Can I get your commitment on that, Bob? Right? You can ask for that. And then I send an email like this. Hey, here are my notes. Please send a reply indicating blah, blah, blah. Here's what we learned. Dr. Robert Myers has the authority to make a decision. He's signing the contract. We have a schedule, blah, blah, blah. Yes, we're good. Very simple, very crisp. Not a lot of fuzzy words, because if you're trying to be nice about it, if you're trying to make it, flow and whatnot, you're going to have a problem. They're not actually going to get to the main thought of it, and they're not going to reply, and then you're in trouble. So, true life story. Last November, was working with an individual who had a tremendous amount of opportunities pipeline. And the pattern that had been emerging over the past couple of years, was that opportunity would get to a certain point and then fall away. Even things very late stage seemed to slip out of his grasp. And won't get into all the detailed stuff, but we did a bunch of what I would call mindset work, and really tried to understand what is keeping him from having a powerful conversation with the prospect. Is this going to happen? Are you the person with authority, et cetera? He'd been trained. He had all the right technique. What's keeping him from actually doing it? And the truth was, he did not want to show up as a pushy sales guy, right? All this technique, all the stuff we were learning was butting up against his natural resistance to being, that guy. And I got to tell you, he's one of the nicest, most thoughtful, considerate, customer-focused people I've ever met. So it sort of was a little funny in a way to think that, wait, you're really worried about, being pushy? Here's the secret. If you're sitting there going, I don't want to be that guy, you're not that guy, right? When I say that guy, I mean the person who's pushy, the person who's rude, the person who's disrespectful. If you think about whether or not you're that guy, you're never that guy, because that guy or that girl, that gal, that woman, there you go, it's better, doesn't think about it, right? That's the irony of it. The person who wonders and worries, I don't want to be pushy, is never going to be pushy, right? It's wild. Anyway, I said, I know you can do better, and I know something's getting in your way, so let's try an experiment. What meetings do you have over the next 2 weeks? And he told me all the meetings. I said, great. Let's work on the objectives. Boom, 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 boom. I want you to write the recap email for each one of these meetings, and the prep email. Hey, here's what we're going to talk about for every one of the meetings. And then I want you to send the prep email and the post, but I want to review them first. What came back to me was amazing. These were the most powerful emails, just like this, very simple. Here's what I'm looking to accomplish, boom, 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 right? On November 1st of 2017, this gentleman was sitting at about 20% of plan, 25% of plan, right? Not a good place to be 2 months left in the year. These are not small deals. These are very complex deals. The chances of, having everything come in and coordinating all the activities in the appropriate way, very, very low, right? But we went through every single one of his opportunities, figured out which ones had a chance of closing, which one didn't, created very specific, here's what has to happen, here's the objectives we need to accomplish in order for these deals to close, and then using this process of establishing objectives, sending the pre-meeting, sending the follow-up, proceeded to close every single one of those deals between that time and the end of the year. From November 1st to December 31st, he went from 25% of plan to just shy of 100% of plan. This is something he was looking at, getting whacked potentially, right? To, 98, 97, I don't remember what it was, but basically just about at plan. That wasn't the result he wanted for the year, but from where he was to where he got to, unbelievable. And it was all because he acknowledged, hey, the systems that are going on in my brain that I'm trying to run to make this work, they're not getting it done, right? something up here is shutting it down. I'm going to go outside of myself, create some systems, and lo and behold, it works. Okay. Other thoughts and tools. I know it's coming up on noon here at this point, but I want to keep going. Like I said, this will be recorded, so you'll all get it. Don't worry if you drop off. I call budget the B word, and I hate the B word. Somebody sent me a question. How does a salesman write a recap email prior to the meeting? That's very simple. You figure out what you want to have happen in the meeting. If you're walking out of the meeting and you got everything you wanted, what would that email look like? You then write it as if it happened. You also write it as a set of objectives. You send those to the client. You hold the meeting, and 99% of the time, you're going to have the exact meeting you want. It's all about creating intention first and moving towards it. It's not predicting the outcome. It's articulating where you want to get to. Now, of course, it comes to pass that some of the things don't actually happen. Either way, you're going to know the difference. What happens when you get to the end of a meeting and the objectives you need to move forward don't happen? That calls into question whether you should have another meeting, doesn't it? That calls into question whether that deal's even real. The B word, budget's terrible. Don't use it. I'm not going to spend all the time on this because my voice is getting hoarse, and we've been going an hour and a half here. But when somebody says to me, well, they have the budget, it's in their budget, you don't know how budgets are produced in that organization. You've never been through a budget cycle. The word budget doesn't mean anything. I could spend all the time in the world, training folks on how do budgets work and what have you, and all the nuances. Why bother? Stay away from it. Stop using the budget word. Budget is a proxy for, do you make the decision to move forward? Do you have the authority to make the decision, right? How is that process going to work? Here's a tool, and I'll send this in the package as well in the form of a template. It's very simple. It's a decision process worksheet. There's 3 things involved in every decision: people, process, money, right? If you're trying to keep track of this in your head and telling stories, somebody says, yes, you don't actually send the recap until the meeting happens. You write it because that's what I want to have happen, right? It's writing the punchline and then coming up with a joke later. I don't know if that actually works. Anyway, here's the decision process worksheet that you can use to capture your understanding of how the decision process is going to work. If all these boxes are filled out, you know how it's going to work. If there's any blanks, you don't know how it's going to work. If any one of these things is blank, you don't know how the decision process is going to work, right? When you put it on paper, when you put it in a format like this, it's impossible to lie to yourself, right? Legal and procurement, blank. Well, I know how this works. No, you don't. You don't know if there's a legal team. Is it internal? Is it external? Do they have procurement? Do they use an outside counsel? Do they have agreements already put together? Have you seen those agreements? What's the timeline for that, right? This is something that you can use, you can download to help you determine, have you done your homework? Another great technique, we call it executive air cover. This is incredibly powerful. What about those situations where you're not positioned with the POA? The person of authority, your point of contact, has explicitly said, no, you're not going to go there. Maybe they've even said, if you try to go there, I'm going to burn you. You're out of the process. I'm shutting you out, right? More often than not, what's really going on is you've got a really, really deep-seated fear that doing something is going to put you in a bad position. So this is a real scenario, right? A lot of this isn't going to work if you are or feel you are completely blocked from the decision maker. And frankly, even I said it, decision maker. Well, somebody just said screeners. This really isn't about screeners, Tim. This is about your primary point of contact who said, I'm managing this deal. A screener is somebody that's keeping you from the person of authority in the context of the deal. You're working a deal with them. That's all right. Don't worry about it. Okay. So let's imagine this happens, because in a lot of organizations, a lot of bigger buying environments, the person of authority is probably above a level you're going to get to, right? At least without causing a lot of disruption. Well, what do? You can ask to go around them. You can make a case. You can ask permission. At the end of the day, when they say no, what do? Well, you call in the air cover. You call in the heavy bombers. And that heavy bomber is your CEO or your leadership team. So this is a concept we've used for a while, and it's very simple, and I'll go through this email. The concept is, if I am blocked at a certain level, I can't go up. Well, I need to make a determination of whether I need to go up. And if I do, maybe it's not me that goes up, right? Like talks to like, peers talk to peer. So in environments that I've worked in, when the primary point of contact is blocking our primary point of contact and saying, hey, no, we're going to keep talking here, but we have a motivation to go higher, we need to know, et cetera, we call up the phone, or we pick up the phone, we call our CEO and say, hey, we're stuck here. I need you to put a call into their CEO and make sure that he or she knows what's going on down here. If he or she doesn't know what's going on, chances are what we're doing is actually an illusion. It's not real. So here's an example of it. Feel free to ask questions or what have you, but it's really pretty simple, right? CEO sends an email, usually through their executive assistant, to the other CEO. I'm writing on behalf of Bob Smith, blah, 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 purposes to understand, hey, let's get a meeting on the calendar. I tell the story of this is a long time ago when I was with Lucent. We were working a deal with Bell South. I should say an account team was working a deal with Bell South. And account team had been embedded for about 6 months, swore up and down that this deal, was going to go and that they're replacing infrastructure and blah, 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 blah. Well, I worked on a team that was supposed to go in and basically provide strategic support, air cover, help close deals that were stuck, what have you. I said, great, we need to get up higher to understand if our functional contacts are, telling us the truth. If they actually know what's going on. I say tell the truth, but they may just not know. They may be, using their own little cognitive dissonance thing or experience that going on. So figured out that our CEO had actually gone to school with their CFO. I don't remember the names. So I went to the CEO of Lucent, our company, and said, hey, listen, I'm going to write you a letter. I need you to write a letter to their CFO asking him to meet with me for 5 minutes. I wasn't on the account team, right? Giving me 5 minutes of his time to ask a couple quick questions. Long story short, routed it through our CEO to their CFO. Funny story, when I called the CFO to ask, or I called the CFO's assistant to say, how does so-and-so, receive messages? She said, you got to send a fax. Believe me, there was email back then, but funny part was the way that their internal process worked between the CFO and his admin was, she wanted stuff faxed. So that's the way we did it. Anyway, fax got into the CFO. He said, yes, we'll grant you a meeting. I called the admin of the CFO. I said, okay, you want to get that meeting? I had 5 minutes on the calendar with the CFO of Bell South. And I was sweating, had the wet pits and everything. But meeting happened. Hello, sir. Towns with Lucent. I'll be brief. Purpose of my call is we have an account team deployed and has been for a significant amount of time, working with this team to do this, that, and the other thing. And the intention here is to replace your, I think it was Nortel switches. This is millions of dollars worth of stuff, tens of millions. And I wanted to confirm that this project was on your radar and that those folks were working under your sanction to find a solution. He laughed. He said, not a chance. Those Nortel servers have another 4 years left in their amortization schedule, which I already took early depreciation on. He gave me a bunch of CFO gobbledygook because of what he did. There is no way in hell that's happening inside of 2 years. I said, thank you so much, sir. Have a great day. We got the answer. Wasn't the answer we wanted, right? We wanted the deal to close. There's always a way you get out of the muck, right? Now, what do you think happened? Well, of course, the functional folks at Bell South got wind of this and started chewing on and yelling at, the folks in our team. Hey, our CEO made this happen. We didn't have a choice. If your CEO is making a call to their CEO and your contact says, hey, what's going on? You're going above my head. You say, I didn't even know he was going to call me. I didn't know he was going to call your CEO. He was looking at the pipeline, wanted to make sure it was legit, told me after the fact he called him. Hey, what do you want to do, right? Peer-to-peer relationships are a great way around blockages. This one I'm not going to go into. I don't have as much time, but I'll send it along as well. It's a little flow chart. If you're not talking to the POA, right? One of the great myths is that if you're not talking to the person of authority, that they're going to get this done if they've never done it before. So one of the explorations I want to have, if you're telling me that I don't need to talk to the person of authority, is fantastic. Let's talk about, have you actually done this here before? How has it worked? What process have you followed? And how can I support you? Will you let me help you build that plan? If yes, we're going to keep talking. But if you've never done this before, we can't get to the person of authority, and you're not going to let me help you at all, I might have to question, should I even be working with you? We'll keep going. So your questions. I'm gonna go and I've printed up some of these things, or I've put them on slides, and we'll go through them. All right. Question from Kent. When the real decision maker pushes me down to a subordinate who is not as knowledgeable nor able to make a decision, how do I get back? Well, I covered that a little bit earlier, Kent. And the concept is you have to secure return access. More importantly, you have to have the courage and determination to ask why this is being pushed down, and understand, is it being pushed down so the decision maker, the person of authority, doesn't have to deal with this at all? It doesn't have to participate, right? Or is it because they actually want somebody else to do the work for them? One of the questions I'll always ask is, I'm happy to work with, somebody says, hey, you got to go work with Bob on this. I'm happy to work with Bob on this. Before I do, let me ask a couple questions. Is this something you want Bob working on? Is it an initiative that if we come back with a potential solution to some challenges, you'd like to see and then act on? Is there a set of requirements, business imperatives, directives that you'd like Bob to, act under? Or is this just a way to get me out of your office? If it's just get me out of the office, maybe it's not a real deal, right? In terms of getting back, I used the verbiage earlier, but you want to say something like, happy to go work with Bob, John, but want to make sure that Bob and I can come back to you in 2 months and present our findings and get a decision on that. How does that sound? That sounds great. Okay, now a decision will be made. You have sanction for return access. Brett asked a question. When is the right time in the sales process to ask if they're a decision maker? Well,